intelligence. And the one to moderate this section is no other than a dean of the School of Information and Communication Studies at the University of Ghana. This is a lady whose research interests cut across advocacy and is a member of the International Council of the International Association of Media and Communication Research, that is IAMCR, and currently chairs the IAMCR's Organizational Communication Working Group. She is also a fellow of the Media Foundation for West Africa and chairs the steering committee of the Alliance for Women in Media Africa. I'm talking about Professor Abena Enimwa-Yeboah-Beni. So I hand over to you for you to moderate this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Modestus Fosu. We have a history from the University of Leeds. If you go to AI, it cannot tell you the secrets about the two of us. Anyway, thank you very much for that introduction. Colleagues, I have the singular pleasure to rate this at the NOAA Media Lecture. It's an annual conversation platform to have us reflect on and think about pressing issues and often it will be held on campuses in universities in Africa with lead media experts and journalists from Germany coming in to speak on topical issues. Our discussion is on the topic fake news and fact-checking, understanding the mechanisms behind modern disinformation. I'm sure you'd agree with me that in the world of 2025 and most likely beyond, information has faster legs, probably even faster than Usain Bolt. And it is enabled by technology. These days, we have algorithm-driven news feeds, AI-generated content. We are dealing with polarized and extremist content disseminated in online echo chambers. The result is what the UN calls an infodemic, a pandemic of disinformation, which sadly is fueling distrust in public institutions, in democracy, but also in the media. And so I would say that it is very apt and timely, our conversation on fake news and fact-checking and how the dynamics of modern disinformation attends these issues. We are fortunate to have a speaker on this conversation, a very, very esteemed journalism professor and also journalism practitioner from Germany. But before I tell you about her, I'll introduce Bra Kweku. Yesterday, he told us he's Kweku. And in Ghana, when you are an adult, we add Kweku to your name. So I'll introduce Bra Kweku Hendrik Sittig, the director for CAS Regional Media Program. Bra Kweku, your microphone.
Thank you very much, Albina. And I can tell you, I'm not a bot. I'm not a fake news. I'm not, however you call it. I'm real and I'm Kwaku. Yes. So, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and its media program for Sub-Saharan Africa, I welcome you to our Adenauer Media Lecture here in Accra. And first, I would like to thank, of course, UNIMEC, the University of Media, Arts and Communications, for your cooperation and hospitality here, and also, of course, the University of Ghana and you, dear Albina, for your support. We are truly pleased to host this lecture here with you. As Albina said, the Adenauer Media Lecture is a series we organize across universities in Sub-Saharan Africa, in inviting renowned German journalists and media experts to share their insights. The title, you can see it here, Fake News and Fact-Checking in the Age of AI. I would say it could not be more relevant. The impact of disinformation is a constant key topic for us as a media program. That's why we recently, and where is my book? Here was my book. Here, wait. Okay, you will show it. Oh, big surprise, surprise. Yeah. Okay. Show it, okay. But our professor from Tanzania had it already here. So wait, sorry for that. Also, the impact of disinformation is a content key topic for us as a media program. That's why we recently published, and you saw it today already once at least here, the study on AI-generated disinformation in Europe and in Africa. The findings are honestly sobering. This threat is evolving repeatedly, and so must our response, I would say. Artificial intelligence has taken the spread of fake news to a new level. Faster, cheaper, more convincing, and more far-reaching than ever before. Disinformation, and I can repeatedly always, disinformation is a digital plug of our time. It poisons public debate, divides societies, and it's often weaponized deliberately and strategically by actors like Russia to destabilize democracy. And let me be clear, there are no alternative facts. No, a lie is a lie. And we must never accept a world where feelings outweigh facts or where truth becomes optional. Democracy thrives on pluralism, of course, on many voices, many opinions, but the foundation of that pluralism must be truthful information. Without it, decision-making becomes dangerous, even destructive. And here's the hard truth. All of us, even the well-intentioned, can become unwitting amplifiers of disinformation, so-called useful idiots. That's why awareness is key. We need to understand where disinformation comes from, how it spreads, and what it does to our societies. This is what we will explore today with our distinguished guest, Professor Dr. Claudia Nothelle. Claudia, thank you for coming to Accra. Thank you for being with us. And of course, thank you to Albena for moderating this lecture. Thank you very much. Danke.
So now I'll do my job of introducing Claudia as our speaker for this afternoon, Professor Claudia Nothelle. Have I done it correctly? Nothelle, yes. She's from Magdeburg-Stendal University of Applied Sciences in Germany. I've literally become a German in preparing for this. She's no novice to this afternoon's discussion. Professor Claudia Nothelle has worked extensively within the German media as a journalist. She's done freelance journalism work. She served as consultant to media organizations in Germany. She served as multimedia program director, but she's also a professor of television journalism at Magdeburg-Stendal University of Applied Sciences. By now, I imagine that in your head, you agree with me that she is very well suited to deliver this lecture on fake news and fact-checking. Professor Claudia, you can take over.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Albena for introducing me and for hosting this afternoon. And thank you very much to Henrik for having me here and for the invitation. Thank you very much to all of you because I really enjoy being here. It has broadened my horizon to discuss with you about the topics which are important for us in Germany, in Europe, and which are important for you over here in Africa. But of course, there are different points of views, and that is really important. We were talking so much about bubbles, and it's important to leave your bubble and to leave your comfort zone. And I'm happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion afterwards. That will probably be, for me, the most important part. So I try to talk during the next 30 to 40 minutes. I hope you're not too hungry. About fake news and fact-checking in the age of AI. And of course, I will talk from the view from Germany, from the EU, and I will try to have a little part about Africa, but that will be your part afterwards in the discussion. I will talk about the mechanics, the psychology, and the responses to disinformation in our digital age with all these insights. The term fake news entered global headlines in 2016. Sorry, now it should work. In 2016, during the US elections. It was the first time when Donald Trump was running for president. And we all were surprised how he was talking about journalism. And he was talking about, you are fake news, you are fake news, you are fake news. And usually that were esteemed colleagues from CNN, from AP News, sometimes from Fox News, actually his favorite broadcaster. So, and he's doing that up to now. So, but he was the one who made this word famous all over the world. The phenomenon itself is much older. History is full of propaganda, hoaxes, and forged documents used to shape opinion. What has changed, Henrik mentioned it already, is scale, speed, and reach. In the digital age, a false story can cross continents in seconds, reaching millions before any journalist or fact checker can react. Will be always too late when it is in the world. That creates what many scholars call a crisis of trust. Whom do we believe? Which facts count? And when shared reality breaks down, democracy and public life itself suffer. So let's start and talk about the evolution of disinformation and the mechanics of disinformation. So, for example, media researcher Claire Wardle offers a helpful framework with 3 categories. First of all, the misinformation. False information shared without intent to harm. Think of a friend forwarding a bogus health tip. Probably most of all of us know those friends and get those messages via WhatsApp or wherever. The second one, The second one is disinformation. False information deliberately created to mislead. For example, a political campaign spreading fabricated scandals. And then there is malinformation, true information shared out of context in a way that harms. Imagine private emails leaked selectively to smear someone. Looking back to the election campaign in 2016, you remember Hillary Clinton and her private emails. It's just one part, but there could be others. So misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. That are the 3 straps you have to have in mind. These distinctions matter. False information shared will do harm. So, but you have to have in mind, you don't respond to a naive mistake the same way you respond to a hostile influence operation. Thank you very much, Rebecca. I will take it. Okay, thank you. So I just mentioned it, falsehood spreads further and faster than truth. And there's a research from the MIT in Massachusetts. They found that fake political stories are 6 times more likely to be retweeted on Twitter or X than accurate ones. They also reach audiences more quickly. Why? Because they are designed to trigger surprise, anger, or fear. Truth is slower, and that's important. It's more complex most of the times and is less clickable. The World Economic Forum's 2024 Global Risk Report went so far as to call AI-powered disinformation the #1 global risk of the next 2 years. So we are within it. They are right. Generative AI doesn't just allow the creation of one convincing lie, it allows thousands of variations of that lie, each tailored to a specific audience, and that is a game changer. It won't be the same lie for us in Germany as for you in Ghana or in South Africa. So it will be really specific for every audience. That's a huge problem. So let's talk about the technological drivers. I'm not an IT specialist, but we should have a look at that. Of course, AI. A recent study by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Henrik just showed it to you, looking at Europe and Africa, called AI disinformation a weapon of mass deception. It described how deepfakes and synthetic propaganda can be produced at scale, cheaply, and spread across multiple channels. One insight was especially important for me. While deepfake videos grab headlines, the real power lies in micro-targeted text-based propaganda. Thousands of small AI-generated messages that look authentic, each fine-tuned to the fears of interest of certain group. Because there's no single viral post to debunk, detection becomes nearly impossible. Germany already has set examples. For one of them, I'd like to tell you. Last year, the AfD, the far right-wing alternative for Germany, released AI-generated campaign pictures. They weren't, you couldn't notice if it was AI or not, and they didn't, of course, they didn't say it's AI-generated. They showed dystopian images of Germany collapsing into chaos linked directly to migration fears. The images were artificial, but its emotional impact was very real. It was cheap, fast, and infinitely adaptable. Beyond AI, we have to have a look at the platform algorithms. They don't reward accuracy. They reward engagement. We were talking about yesterday in our panel, we were talking about the guy arriving with a Ferrari or Lamborghini or whatever car he had to the university. And we talked about the huge engagement this story had. It was of course, it was no fake news, but you could see it was engagement by an emotional post. It was no accurate news or anything like that. But that is what that counts for TikTok, for Instagram, for Facebook, for YouTube. That generates clicks. It keeps the users glued to the screen. Outrage is sticky. Algorithms amplify it. Then, of course, we have coordinated campaigns. We know about waves of so-called FIMI operations. That means foreign information manipulation and interference. These are not lone trolls. We don't have to think of someone sitting under a bridge and thinking about what could I write now on X or Facebook or somewhere else. No, they are organized networks, often run outside the EU, often in Russia, sometimes in Asia, using fake accounts and bots to amplify narratives. Sometimes they even push contradictory ones simultaneously, pro and anti-immigration, for example. The goal is not persuasion, but confusion, to make citizens doubt everything. That is a problem. And then there's the so-called dark social. Platforms like WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, Threema, whatever you use. Encrypted by design, they are wonderful for privacy, but perfect for spreading falsehood out of sight. By the time a claim surfaces in public, it may already have reached thousands or even millions privately. The CAS study notes this as one of the hardest challenges for regulators. We cannot correct what we cannot see. Talking about technology is one point. Talking about psychology is the other one, because technology can explain how lies spread. Psychology explains why we believe them. Why do we believe these lies? Why aren't we like, oh no, I can't doubt. And probably if I would ask you, who of the audience has already shared something wrong? Probably most of us would say, yes, I did. I did, for example, because I thought, okay, it can't be. I have to spread that. And 10 minutes later, I noticed, no, I should delete this post. So that is a point we want to believe. Some stories we actually want to believe. So the most powerful mental bias here is the confirmation bias. We were talking about bubbles, and this is part of this bubble thinking. We are more likely to believe things that fit our worldview and dismiss things that don't. And you all know about this effect. Platforms make this worse by showing us more of what we already like, the filter bubble. Then there's motivated reasoning. A Swiss study in 22 put it clearly. Many lies succeed not because they are convincing, but because they are what people want to believe. If a claim confirms your identity, your politics, or your group loyalty, you share it without checking. Of course, emotion plays a huge role. A meta-analysis in 23 found that posts sparking moral outrage were about 70% more likely to be shared than neutral posts. Fear, anger, disgust, these drive clicks, and the algorithm rewards them. This is what some call the outrage economy. Talking about earning money, you need this engagement via outrage. There's another effect, the illusory truth effect. The more often we hear something, the truer it feels. Even if we knew it was false the first time, repetition erodes resistance. That's why slogans are repeated endlessly in politics. Familiarity feels like truth. And sometimes they just say, oh, 100% of my Facebook friends like this post. It must be true, so I just will share it. That's a problem. And then last but not least, there's information cynicism. So people begin to doubt everything, even reliable journalism. Instead of making people more careful, constant alarm can make them give up. And a cynical citizen is easy prey because they stop looking for evidence at all. So if you think everything must be wrong and they're talking about fake news, okay, I will stop fact-checking. All of these effects make fact-checking so hard. You can't find an emotional, identity-driven story with a dry correction. It won't work. And you can't rely on a one-time debunk because repetition keeps a falsehood alive. That's why pre-bunking, not debunking, but pre-bunking, teaching people manipulation tricks before they encounter them, has shown such promise. Cambridge University had an online game called Bad News. I just found it during the research for this lecture, and I will try to do it with my students and train them to debunk falsehoods. It could be interesting, and this online game could help a lot of people to get aware of what's going on there. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the European EU reaction to these effects. So first of all, there are case studies. Let's talk about the German refugee crisis 10 years ago. There was our Chancellor Angela Merkel and her famous wording, "Wir schaffen es." We managed that. Almost 900,000 to 1 million asylum seekers were arriving in late summer and autumn. They were fleeing war and instability in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and there were a lot of people coming to Germany from Africa too. And at the height of the crisis, Angela Merkel made this famous statement, "Wir schaffen das," we can manage this. It was a phrase meant, so that's my opinion, reassurance, meant to signal confidence and humanitarian responsibility. We are a rich country. We were successful in so many points, and we will handle that. So, but over the time, it became one of the most polarizing sentences in recent German history. Supporters saw it, like I just tried to explain, as a call for solidarity and integration. Opponents turned it into a symbol of naivety or political overreach. Online, on Facebook, X, at that time it was still Twitter, Instagram, Wir schaffen das quickly mutated into a meme, parodied, weaponized, and used as shorthand for Merkel's refugee policy. And there were, of course, a lot of false pictures, false news. 10 years later, nowadays, we just had the anniversary, it still shapes public debate. Integration successes coexist with ongoing challenging, but the disinformation dimension is clear. So there are exaggerated claims, social media posts, inflated crime statistics, or linked unrelated incidents directly to refugees. And for journalists, it's almost not possible to debunk all of that. And if they try to tell another story and try both sides to tell both sides of a story, they will have a huge discussion that won't help anymore. So it's destroyed, this point. Then, of course, they are not only the exaggerated stories, they are fabricated stories. So some news outlets thinking about, oh, the refugees, they get everything. They get their cars, they live in a hotel, they have the best food, whatever you can think. And our poor German people, they aren't allowed to do this or that. So, and of course, that generates clicks. And it's so difficult to tell the truth behind the story. And then, last but not least, you could talk about amplification loops. Research from the University of Hamburg showed that the anti-immigration groups on Facebook spread and recycled these narratives far more effectively than corrections could counter them. This case study shows how a real humanitarian crisis was reframed online into a narrative of fear and failure. And even 10 years later, this narrative still is a stronger one. There are other examples I just want to mention, just shorter. For example, the federal elections in Germany 2017, 21, and this year in 25 as well. The German intelligence service warned of Russian-linked interference, bots, leaks, and divisive narratives. EU monitors saw both pro and anti-immigration messages from the same networks. The aim, polarization. Just to remind you of the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, there were so many fake news all over the web. Probably in Europe, this topic was much larger than in Africa, but nevertheless, they had really, really horrible stories. Then, talking about the Ukraine war. Telegram channels pushed narratives that Ukraine was run by Nazis, or that sanctions hurt Europeans more than Russia. By late 22, the narrative shifted to economic fears, freezing Germans. So we will have enough gas for heating during the winter time. And they showed pictures of people sitting in their apartments and freezing. And nobody had to freeze during the winter time in Germany. Otherwise, we should have asked you to send some pullovers or something like that. So it was really crazy. And who will win by these stories? Russia, of course, because they want to have these stories spread. Last but not least, we have to talk about alternative media. Hendrik just said there's not something like alternative facts. I would like to say there's not something like alternative media. In Germany, we have this media like Reitschuster, for example. It's just a German online network, so you won't know it, or Compact. And they spread stories without fact-checking. They say we are just telling the other side of the story, the second point. But if you try to read them and try to check them, you could notice, no, they don't do it. They spread fake news. And that's a huge problem because some people living in their bubble, they say, I don't trust legacy media anymore. I don't trust, you are all influenced by the politicians. You are not free in that what you are going to report. And to explain that, of course, we are free. And the chancellor doesn't give us a call in the newsroom what to report the next day. It's difficult to explain. They lost the trust, and they trust these media outlets who spread fake news. So Europe tried to respond, and probably you heard about this idea. So first, there was a voluntary framework in 2018. It is a self-regulatory agreement signed by major tech platforms. And they started with Google, with Meta, TikTok, Microsoft, and even Twitter took part. Advertisers and fact checkers. And its commitment include demonetization, so taking away the money, cutting off advertising revenues for websites that consistently spread disinformation. So this should work, for example, for these networks I was talking about, for example, for Rightschuster or Campact. So, but they, of course, they didn't join this voluntary framework. They, if you sign this and if they are a member of it, they are obliged to give ad transparency, requiring clear labeling of political and issue-based advertising, including information of who paid for the ad and which audiences were targeted. Then they started a fact checker cooperation. It didn't work so well, but they started and they tried with independent fact-checking organizations and better promotion of verified content. Last but not least, they started to introduce user empowerment, providing tools to flag suspicious posts. So this was the voluntary point. All of them tried to deal with it, but Twitter X withdrew in 2023, and they were talking about freedom of speech. They said they don't allow us to say what we ever want to say, and it's a freedom of speech. Probably you followed the discussion about Musk saying we don't need any fact checkers. Our audience is a fact checking, so that is a problem. Okay, now I hope you still can understand me. So, and then they introduced in 23 the Digital Service Act that is different. It is binding EU law. You're obliged to follow it. Unlike the code, it applies to all online platforms with stricter obligation for so-called very large online platforms with more than 45 million EU users. So they try to answer this fake news, this non-fact checking, and they try to regulate it, but they are always in their difficult decision to free speech and regulating. So what are you going to do? How are you going to handle it? And are you fast enough to stop these fake news, at least for Europe? So that is one of the points the European Union tried. And I want to mention this as well. There's a media literacy program. So Finland starts this with critical thinking as a lesson in school. They have classes in critical thinking and media literacy. In Germany, we have a program called Lie Detectors that brings journalists into school classes, and the journalists are talking with the young students about fake news research, how to detect fake news, how to do fact checking. but probably it's not enough, but it's at least the beginning. So, and later on, what I found about Ghana, I thought that's interesting that you had this media literacy programs not only for children and young students, but in communities, in churches, in schools for the parents. And I think that is a good point to do that. At that point, I just want to tell something about the role of traditional media, especially public media in Germany, the legacy media. It's still, people trust them. They still think this is the media most of the people, a majority thinks we want to trust them. These are the important players. So for example, we have in Germany the Tagesschau. Tagesschau is their most seen news show in legacy, in linear TV program, but they are on Insta, they are on TikTok anyway to reach the young generation. But they say, we are the ones with the news to trust in. We don't sell you fake stories. Everything is fact-checked. So that is the way they try to organize and to gain trust again. So they have the dual responsibility. They are anchors of reliability, fragmented landscape, and they have the responsibility paid by the public, not by tax money, but by the public, by a fee, which has to be paid by everyone in Germany. And on the other hand, they have to be models of journalistic standards for the digital public. They try to be role models. So the challenge is adapting to platform logic while maintaining standards. So looking for clicks and still working for quality journalism, that's not easy. And it's not always working. So now I make a short trip to Ghana, but please, you should fact check what I'm going to tell you about Ghana. So it's just the thing I've found during my research for this lecture. So I read a story about the election periods in 2024. There was a Ghana fact-checking coalition, that's what I read. They found nearly half of viral political stories contained falsehoods. Much of this spread on WhatsApp. We were talking about this dark platforms, and community radio, often in local languages, where English language fact checks don't reach. So there's one example I was really impressed. A viral WhatsApp message circulated in early December 24 alleged that the Electoral Commission had secretly added macho men, political vigilantes, to polling stations in northern Ghana to intimidate voters. The post included a grainy image of armed men in uniforms, supposedly taken near a polling center in Tamale. The Ghana fact-checking coalition investigated and found the photo was not from Ghana at all, but an old picture from Nigeria that had been recycled and miscaptioned. Local journalists confirmed with the Electoral Commission that no such deployment had taken place. The story had spread widely in WhatsApp groups and was shared on Facebook pages allied with one political party before being debunked. And you can imagine that could have been really, really important for the election in northern Ghana. The false claim fed into existing fears about election violence. Even though it was debunked, the image gained traction quickly, demonstrating how recycled photos and narratives can spark mistrust in the electoral process and, in the end, at democracy at all. That's a danger for democracy. So now I tried to come to the end because we want to have a little bit of discussion. So I want to close my remarks. Where does this leave us? We've seen that fake news is not simply a matter of facts versus lies. That would be too easy. It is a structural challenge amplified by technology and rooted in psychology. It cannot be solved by one tool alone. Technology can help, but algorithms alone won't fix democracy. Education, we all know that, it's our field, is essential, but it takes time. Fact-checking is vital, but always one step behind. We are always too late with our fact-checking. Regulation has power, but must balance free speech with accountability. This is not just a fight for truth, it's a defense of the very possibility of truth. The philosopher Hannah Arendt once wrote that the most dangerous state is not when people believe lies, but when they no longer believe anything at all, because then facts no longer matter and power fills the void. I think, although it's more than 50 years old, this sentence, it's more than important for our times now. Our job as journalists, researchers, educators, policymakers, and citizens is to make sure that does not happen. We must build systems that make truth visible, trust durable, and manipulation difficult. The task is really difficult. But resilience is possible when technology, education, journalism, regulation, and community all work together. Let's commit to that together. Thank you very much.
Hello. Hello. Thank you very much, Professor Claudia Nothelle. Prof. Fosu, where are you? Because we had to skip lunch to do this, I need a sense of how many minutes we should do our Q&A session for. 20 minutes? Okay. All right. So thank you very much, Professor Nothelle. Now we will take any questions that there are on the floor. And I see Prof. Akinfele's hand up.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for the excellent presentation, Professor. I agree with you that fake news is not a new phenomenon. As a matter of fact, it has been with us more than over 128 years. It faded away. And as we said, 2016, he was resurrected by Mr. Donald Trump during his first coming. And it has remained to suffocate the media landscape all over. Some political elements have taken that as a subject matter to destabilize and work against democracy. My question to you is that, with the foregoing, can fake news take over from the mainstream journalism? Bear in mind that some political leaders have advocated the ban, abolition of fake news in their society. But from my last research count, I found out that about 35 countries of the world have made legislation to stop or to abolish fake news. But it has been very, very difficult for them to implement, because of the fundamental human rights and, on the other hand, freedom of the press. What is your take? Thank you.
Okay, let me try to answer this question, which is not easy, but I try to. So first of all, I think freedom of the press is really, really important, but freedom of the press doesn't mean freedom of lies. So And you can have an alternative opinion, but no alternative facts. So I think that must be clear, and that is, for me at least, the fundament of my teaching. I try to talk them. First of all, you have to check the facts, and you have to get all the facts, and then you can have the opinion. Because nowadays, most of our students and most of the journalists are really quick in having an opinion, but it sometimes is difficult to get all the facts. So that is one point. So freedom of the press is so important. And in many countries, our journalistic colleagues, the people, they are fighting for the freedom of press. And we should help them and don't say, okay, it's not so important, let's stop it. So that means thinking about Germany, that's a country I know best. So thinking about this alternative media. So yes, they should publish what they want to publish, but there are borders. You couldn't be allowed to publish everything you want to. So if there's a lie, they should be forced to depublish it if you know it's a lie. So for example, if they publish, so don't know, 70% of their immigrants are using weapons for running. Of course, they don't do that. So and then you should say, no, you aren't allowed to publish this. That's wrong. And that's difficult in online media. In legacy media, it's a little bit easier. So, and on the other hand, we have, as journalists and journalism academics, to fight for the trust in media again and for transparency in media, so that we are going to explain, how do I get my information? How do I do my research? And then try to make my story better, because I know emotional told stories are read, others are boring for the audience. So that's what I try to do, to make our media and our understanding of journalism better. And that would be the point, hopefully, when fake news won't take over from the mainstream media, but that's a problem.
Thank you very much for that response. I'll touch on that before I go to the next speaker. We've seen that often and he says that countries have tried legislation which have become difficult to implement, because often the legislations are formed from emotion. Political actors who feel control the right to speak. And that perhaps is also another thing that we want to look at. Which kinds of legislations and from whose point of view, which point of integrity frame legislations, and indeed how timely even the legislations are going to be, because the animal we are dealing with is running at a rather very fast pace. And by the time legislations come, it has changed the way it operates. So that's a challenge. But I have a question for you. I like that you shared some of the psychological roots of, or that frame the fast spread of disinformation, the confirmation bias, motivated reasoning, etc. So there are real psychological reasons misinformation and disinformation will travel as fast as they do. Can you share any tips that fact checkers, guided by these psychological reasons, can revise the way they do fact checking and publish it so that it is able to tackle these psychological roots? In other words, as an audience member, when the story comes to me, perhaps because it confirms some bias, I am holding on to it even longer than I should. But when the fact checker does a story, and as you said, the truth will travel at a slower pace, what tricks should the fact checker use so that it is able to truly debunk the story and every little detail it is leaving in my mind?
Oh, if I knew that, I would run a fact-checking website. So no, I think on one hand, it's a question of storytelling, because, of course, the truth is more complex than the fake news because it's very easily told. And if you want to explain the truth, it's not only black and white. They are different. They are shades of black and white in between. So you have to try to explain them. But the fact checkers have to be really, really good storytellers. Just a small notice, it was wrong. And it is wrong because of ABC that won't work. So they have to tell the story of another migrant who did this or that. Or they have to tell. I read a very interesting story in the New York Times about how one of these fake news got viral in the US and how it worked. And it was so interesting to read this story. So it could be part of how to do your journalistic work. The research is important, but the storytelling is really, really important to get the emotional impact.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think I talked about fake news, misinformation not being new, and having is as old as over 100 years. I dare say that it has been with us since humans came into this world. Because as long as we've been gossiping, lying about others, we've always been involved in all of that. Well, I also want to say that from the lecture, and I'm sure we all agree that we need a sanitized media environment for us to get the right information that we need, yes, and to make informed decisions. So while some have argued that we should allow every kind of information to be out there and make all of us, media and information literate, to be able to sit between or among all the lots of information that we have and take out which ones are credible, reliable, and so on. Others are of the view that, and we should not even let the misinformation even go out there in the first place. I want your thoughts on how we can navigate this, in terms of the fact that we need a free media environment. We don't want censorship. We want all of us to thrive in a very free media environment. People should be able to share information, receive information as and when they want. And the question of misinformation. So how do we navigate this terrain where, if we are not careful, I think Prof. Abna spoke about that, certain actors would restrict certain kinds of information to go out there for their parochial interest and so on. How do we navigate the management of the spread of misinformation and ensuring a free media environment?
Perhaps we should change a well-known slogan to make journalism great again. So we should explain to people why journalism is important. And I know Peter is still there, our influencer. So we had a discussion yesterday about journalism and influencing and where the difference. And you told us how it worked, that you tried to do all the right stuff, get the right information and do the research like journalists do. But we know everyone is allowed to publish on social media without being checked. Everyone is allowed to, perhaps the audience does the checking, community notes on X, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. We know this way. So making it possible to explain to the audience that the role of journalism and journalists is to get the right information, to check it, to get transparency, and to give the context and everything. And it's not the breaking news anymore because you get it everywhere. But to give the background and to explain that is the role of journalism. That's why the journalism need, and perhaps that's why you have to pay for journalism. Because if it's free or it's just financed by ads, it could become different.
How come?
Thanks, and thanks for your most interesting talk. I wonder whether you could reflect on whether there is a possibility, a danger, if you like, of quality information becoming a privilege and a marker of almost social stratification and elite. I mean, we've seen the rise of right-wing populism in the US and in Europe and in some other places. And it's almost like you can say that there is an elite that gets good information and there's the rest who don't. And isn't that in itself a problem? And how does one begin to address that bubble?
I don't have.
That's a really interesting point. Just talking about paying for journalism a few seconds ago, but it's a point because journalists have to live by that what they do. Yes, and it's a point. And who is ready? Thinking about Germany, where people don't have to starve, and most of them have enough for living. They don't want to pay for journalism anymore because they get the information via Facebook, Instagram, wherever, it's for free. So, yeah, that's a point. And I think we have to come to a point to explain why good journalism couldn't be for free and to explain it again. And talking about elite people using is another one, thinking about the attention span of people, because probably to read a long article from a newspaper on a web page, or to watch a difficult documentary, complex topic, it's more challenging than just watching a TikTok. And so if someone tries to explain in a 90 seconds TikTok the difficulty of global war and peace in 90 seconds, or the difficulty of the conflict in Israel and Gaza in 90 seconds, you won't know enough to have to judge the situation. But people think, I know everything about it, so let's go for it. To make them ready to read more, to listen for a longer time, to listen to different points of view, and then at the end, perhaps to pay for it if possible, or to make it, or to get other people to pay for it. But if you don't pay for it on your own, if government pays, who pays says what to write. So it's really, really a difficult question. And you see, I don't have the answer right now. But we have to talk about that.
Thank you. So I sometimes think that one of the struggles for this campaign for information literacy or media literacy is mostly because of the historical background of media in our society. I mean, we're coming from the history where we couldn't believe that radio could lie. You know, in our villages or communities, what we heard on radio was the truth. And the media was this mystical institution that we never knew. We respected whatever was coming from there. And now we are here in a phase where we are saying, let's fact check. You get the point. So we still have that, people in the community still have that belief that the media can't lie. And so that also gave birth to a cadre of journalists who feel they are self-righteous. They carry themselves with this self-righteous indignation, you know, such that, you know, even if they become partisan and all that, they still believe in themselves, and they still believe that people will believe what they have to say, you know, and they then carry themselves with, of course, the tradition that we've allowed, the libertarian kind of tradition. They use free press to defend whatever lies. They can't, you know, they shout harassment when they are called upon to answer for their lies. You see, so we have this system where it is really complicated to even nip this issue. Of course, we can't talk about regulation because, again, there will be people crying censorship and suppressing freedoms. But we have a cadre of people that are peddling lies, and they are partisan. They are politicians acting as journalists. So we are really in a very difficult situation, where even media houses and newsrooms, we know this belongs to this one who's trying to stand for this presidents. This belongs to this one who's doing whatever it is. They're just politicians. So it's a paradox that we then need to start understanding, and I don't know how we can resolve it. But for me, following up on your response, Prof, your response to Theodora, I've kind of become a preacher of transparency in journalism. We need to advocate for communities, our audiences, some sort of justification for why we choose which sources, and those explanations can be embedded in our, media products somehow. But again, the struggle is that journalists resist that because, we have created a journalism culture where they believe they're the ones to expose, they're the ones to dig deeper and cover the corrupt practices of other people out there. And so when we put the gaze on them to say, we want you to explain yourselves, it's a tradition that is difficult to get from them. So this is part of the, the struggle that we are going through. And we need to also develop a culture of, some of us belong to all these media bodies, MISA, whatever, all these journalist protection bodies and all that. We should be able to call out our journalists who are not ethical, but we don't. We just maybe talk to them privately and allow the rot to spread. Thank you.
I didn't see Paul, so I'll go to Solace, I'll go to Aurelia, I'll go to Paul.
Thank you, Prof, for the insightful presentation. One of the things I picked from your presentation was the issue of trust for traditional media. But if we look at the context, I'm just using Ghana as an example. Issues of media ownership comes up. Information is a tool for control, manipulation, dominance. So for a lot of people who are now aware of this, the question then comes up, whose truth? And who is branding this information as disinformation or malinformation or misinformation? That's a very serious issue. For us in Ghana, over the past 3-4 years, I started noticing, and it was my mom who said, I'm going to listen to a certain alternative media. I didn't even know that alternative person existed. And this is because people had begun to think that because this person is not the government, this person is not controlled by any advertiser or corporate institution, what they are telling us is the truth. And if you want, getting into our elections, people trusted those alternative sources more than they trusted legacy media. So I think this is an issue we should also look at. Whose truth? And because information is also a tool for warfare, who is presenting this as disinformation? And the wider public is choosing who to believe. So that's an area. I don't know how we can navigate that as media educators who are ourselves sometimes polarized, because we also belong to different political spaces. And so we see things based on the glasses we are wearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sole. Since it was a comment, I'll go to Aurelia and then I'll come back to you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a quick question, but before that, I'd want to say thank you very much, Prof. Claudia. So the point you made about fact-checking, right, and debunking moving at a slower pace. Having joined the fact-checking coalition during the election period, one of the things that we noticed was that when the fact-checking and the debunking is presented in the same format as the disinformation itself, it traveled faster. So I'm talking about visual appeals, the kind of language, etc., that was used. Sometimes the misinformation is in, let's say, tree, for instance. If you debunk a tree misinformation in English, you notice that it doesn't have as much uptake. So that the goal then became the format, even aesthetically, that the misinformation happens. The debunking has to take that form and go to the platforms that they were shared on. So I just wanted to share that. My substantive question, though, is that as a media and information literacy teacher, I think personally that perhaps there's more value in that if I were weighing that as opposed to fact-checking, right? Because the misinformation is inoculation. It teaches citizens to be able to identify rather than sort of a responsive that the fact-checking is. To that effect, you mentioned pre-banking. I'm wondering if there's any criteria by which we should look at sort of certain pieces of information or trends to begin to sort of conceptualize the ways in which we will teach pre-banking or begin to signal students to sort of the things that will be included in pre-banking. So when it comes to fact-checking, for instance, we teach that not everything is fact-checkable, for instance, like opinions and promises, etc. If we take sort of that knowledge to pre-banking, what would it look like? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if you first comment on Solis's point about media ownership and the implication for the disinformation ecosystem, and then we'll come to it.
Okay, I try to. So first of all, there were again the T's we were talking about. Yesterday we had the 4 T's, and during our discussion today, I thought there is a 5th one, that means transparency. So that's really important. We were talking about the transparency to make journalistic work understandable again and trustable. So that would be one point for how reacting as journalists and academics to these questions. And that leads directly to your question of trust for traditional media and the situation. I was talking about public media in Germany and the situation over here. Who owns the media? So who is behind it? And it's difficult to trust. And I thought about probably I had better talked about trust for traditional journalistic work and not traditional media, because you have to know how it is done, how is the research done, are there different point of views, and is it fact-checked, for example, and then it doesn't matter on which platform you can read it. So if you see a video on Facebook, on YouTube, or if you go on TV, so we should talk about traditional journalistic work. And then it's, again, that would be my answer to pre-banking. It's really important to have a look who owns the media, who pays for it, who is the one who is publishing this. That is kind of pre-banking. And getting a news via WhatsApp I could say who's sending that, because, but sometimes someone sends it to me and it isn't checked. It's just, did you notice this? And I say, no, but it could be wrong. So, but thinking about who wins when this is published, who gets more money. So that is for me the most important question of pre-banking. So yeah, short answers.
Thank you very much. So I'm concerned about the disinformation aspect of fake news, especially when it's coming from high-profile personalities. You mentioned about Donald Trump, for instance, and his Truth Social. He has over 6 million followers. So if he puts out something in the public domain and it's a fake news or it's to disinform, by the time we fact check, the damage it must have caused will be too much for us to grapple with. And so my question is, can we also devise a means by which we can kind of outpace things that are put out there as fact checkers, or what should we do to kind of stem it? Otherwise, before we are aware, these things are overtaking us. For example, Peter for Nigeria, I don't know how many followers you have, but if he's able to put out something there and it is not the truth, or it is not correct, you can imagine his followers, the harm he would cause the followers. So what are we going to do to kind of match the pace with which disinformation or fake news is banded around?
Yeah, of course, there's a kind of a responsibility of the audience. And if the audience is well educated, or if it's open to, it's not just a question of education, if it's open to think about that, what they listen to, what they see, what they watch, and they could answer, then I think that is the best way to react and to do the fact checking. And thinking about my work 20 years ago, sometimes I got a phone call in the beginning of my journalistic work, and someone said to me, oh, actually, it wasn't quite right what you said, and your report had a mistake at that point. And they say, okay, let me check that again. And I changed it at one point. Of course, it's never nice to get a phone call and someone says you made a mistake, but that's how it worked. But nowadays, it's because of digitalization, it's much more complicated. And then I think in some cases, talking about this, people who are the faces of fake news, they are sometimes really people who stand for a certain opinion, and their audience wants to believe everything they say. It's not a critical thinking anymore. They like heroes. They are the real heroes, the role models, and everything must be true. And at that point, it's really difficult to get the audience for us and to explain them and to say them, just think about it once more. Could it be true? It's really difficult. So I think that's the difference between influencers like Peter. Sorry, you are our role model here for influencing during these days. Like Peter and other people who just stand for, oh, I can tell them everything I want to, they will believe me everything. That's a little bit more than a religion, than journalism.
Thank you very much, Claudia. And on that note, I'm afraid I cannot take more questions. I don't want you to be hungry, so take it that I am being kind to you. If I take more questions, I'm denying you of lunch. This has been a very, very good discussion, I think, and also the presentation prior to that. Very key questions that have come up that we need to continue debating on. Whose truth? Who is labeling it as disinformation? And exactly how much faith should we put in that label even when it comes? And also, how do we manage it? How do we regulate it in a manner that does not trample on our right to speak and think and share information? But also, what is the cost of doing this? You know, who is going to pay for this and what implications arise because that person has the power to bankroll fact-checking and the management of misinformation. So as you can see, there are very, very serious questions arising out of this discussion, which is a nice way of telling you we're not finishing the discussion here. Let's continue them in our circles as we leave even the conference, and let it also begin to drive the research that we do. The world needs answers on how to navigate the canker of disinformation, and that evidence can only come from scholars, researchers, practitioners who are very interested in finding answers. So continue the discussion. On this note, let me thank Professor Claudia Nothelle for the very, very good work done in presenting on this topic. We've learned a lot, and thank you also to CAS for sponsoring this and making sure that we're able to have this discussion. Thank you very much for listening to me. I refuse to be the one standing between you and lunch. Let us go for lunch.
Thank you.
Hello, please, we are going to take pictures, but before then, we should just officially close today, and I'll hand over the microphone to Franz to close us for today's session. Thank you.
This was unexpected. I herewith close the session. Let's have lunch. Just we're done for the day, but do remember tomorrow there is the UNESCO workshop, which I hope many of you will attend. Thank you very much, and thanks very much to everybody concerned today.
Thank you. So please, let's come up here, everybody. We're going to take a group picture. It's not a word.
Careful. Okay. One step to your left. Everybody take one step to your left. There we go. One more. Super. Okay. Are we coming or are we hungry?